I'm John Hupalo, host of My College Corner, and I want to welcome my friend, Mark Salisbury. Mark, welcome back to My College Corner. I do want to spend a couple of minutes talking about the new output from the FAFSA, the Student Aid Index. So in the past, it used to be that put all this information in, and the result was something called the expected family contribution that a lot of people saw as a number. So this is something I can understand. And we were sort of conditioned to believe that that number was that the government expected us to contribute. So I had a number in mind and saying, they said 20,000. So I've had a thought right away, I have to come up with 20,000. The Student Aid Index is also a number that's going to come out as a result of filing all this information through the FAFSA. But how is that fundamentally different from the EFC, and what does it mean?
That's such a great question. And it's going to be quote unquote interesting to watch. A lot more interesting if you don't actually have a kid and going off to college this year. But this is such a great example of words matter and terminologies matter, and what they refer to and what they don't refer to really shapes circumstances for folks. You're right. It used to be called the expected family contribution. That term was coined to reflect the number really for folks that were thinking about the Pell Grant. Over time, colleges just adopted it as, well, if it's applicable to the low income folks, it ought to be applicable to middle and upper income folks, even though it was never designed to do that. That caused all kinds of crazy, understandably so. Sure. The federal government realized that and have changed, in addition to changing the formula underneath the FAFSA, then said, well, we can't possibly still hold on to this idea that that's a number that's anywhere in the ballpark of what a family should be able to pay. We're just going to call it something else. What should we call it? Well, what's a term for a set of numbers that range from small to large that are only useful in comparing to each other on that range? Well, that's an index. Oh, okay. So let's call it the Student Aid Index. So all that number means now is the Student Aid Index suggests that you're in relatively better financial situation than me. It doesn't necessarily mean that I would have more money to pay for college, or you would have more money to pay for college. And it certainly doesn't mean that that number is the number I ought to ask you for. Yeah. It just means that on this scale, I'm a little bit south of you.
Yeah.
That's all it's supposed to mean.
So if I understand this right, the upper end of the range that you're talking about is really like the full cost of attendance. So if my SAI comes back and it's some very large number, I'm thinking, I'm not going to most likely get any need-based aid. I might get some merit aid, right? But I'm not going to get any need-based aid most likely. But on this scale, it goes to negative 1,500, so negative 1,500. What does it mean to have like a zero SAI or a negative 1,500 student aid index? What can you help us come to grips with that?
Sure. Part of the logic here is that when zero was expected family contribution, there's a whole lot of families that have less than zero to pay for college. And they certainly don't have the money to pay for books and for the insurance that they got to buy for their kid to go to that college. And then just the cost of living in colleges. When you and I went to college, there were phones on the wall with cords hanging from them. And now none of those exist, and they just expect you to pay for your kid's cell phone, right?
Right.
And whatever data they're downloading on a Saturday night. So there's a whole bunch of other costs that go into actually being able to go to college that for a lot of families mean that they don't end up at zero. They really are actually going to need to come up with extra money. And the way that this formula works is that there's an ability of the formula to more accurately reflect that this family ends up in a negative space, which really means they need extra help. And it was intended, I think, also knowing that colleges are going to see that number and use that as a proxy for this family's financial situation. If you just see a zero, you're like, oh, okay. Well, if you see a negative, you're like, okay, it really does mean we're going to have to help the student out. Otherwise, they're never going to be able to finish here. And so there was a little bit more thoughtfulness put into where this spectrum actually needs to go. So down on the bottom, yes, it can be as low as negative 1,500. Up top, it can go way past the cost of attendance. And this number could theoretically be, I mean, I don't think it's changed in that there's still the possibility that there are 6 digits. Like you could have a 999,999 student aid index.
Yeah, I see. So there's really no upper range. It's out there. Whatever it is, it is.
It just is what it is.
Yeah. And the bottom is negative 1,500. And if you're 0 to negative 1,500, that's an indication, a strong indication that the student's going to need a lot of aid to get through and complete.
Right.
Yeah, perfect. Well, Mark, that's really good. I know you field these questions all day long from families all around the country, from Hawaii to Maine. Is there any other concept that we didn't talk about that's worth just mentioning that you're hearing from folks particularly concerning them?
Yeah, there's probably 2 of them that we need to tackle.
Okay.
One is the old terminology that was floating around here. Folks called it the sibling discount.
Yeah. Okay.
And sadly, somebody came up with that term and it wasn't really a useful term, but it gave people the idea that, and it was part of the old formula. If you have multiple kids in college, then the expected family contribution for each of those kids needs to account for the fact that you still are a family unit. Right. And so if you got multiple kids in college, you still have the same family contributing for both of them, so that kid's EFC is going to be smaller, right? And so they account for that. In the new student aid index, they threw that whole thing out, so that now if a family has multiple kids in college, it doesn't shape the student aid index, because now the index is just for that one student. And since that number is not supposed to represent what that family should actually pay, it doesn't have to be connected to something that was a function of that family unit, right? This is a part of shifting to the new logic, the new concept. And there's a lot of people that are pretty worried about how that's going to play out. I think in the vast majority of cases, folks need to just relax. Colleges are not going to be able to increase your price by $20,000 just because they switched it from EFC to SAI. That's not
I want you to say that one more time, because there's so much anxiety about, it's October 1, it's not going to be out until December, and the schools are there. We talk about this all the time. The schools are businesses, right? And we try to get our students and parents to say, think of this as a purchase. You are a consumer of education. And there are 2 sides to that transaction. So your point, I'd like you to reemphasize that about the way the schools are likely to handle this year of, no question, a lot of confusion, but they still have a business to run. So what are they likely to do?
Yeah, so that's such a great point to bring up, and to put it in the context of understanding colleges are a business, and that business sector is under tremendous pressure these days. Most colleges aren't even able to get enough students to fill their classes on a given year. And they are so aware of the public skepticism of higher ed these days. They're also so aware of the influence of social media on the perception of those institutions. So, given those things, a college has the option, let's say, of, it went from EFC to SAI, and the student's EFC was 30,000, but now the SAI is 50,000. Am I going to just turn around and charge that family 20 grand more because it just changed? No. Why? Because if you do, the holy terror of social media will come raining down on you as a college. The New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the LA Times, every one of them will find out about this story, and it'll be the biggest clickbait story of the month. That school will get pummeled, and schools know that kind of bad PR during the period of time in which students are choosing which school they're going to actually send a tuition deposit to will kill their yield. So there's no way that college thinks, oh yeah, we'll be fine. they're under pressure in the marketplace, just like the consumer is, right? So the colleges aren't going to suddenly jack everybody's prices up because it went from EFC to SAI and there was suddenly no more sibling discount. Let's set aside for a moment, the fact that most colleges just give money on merit anyway and don't care about need. So the EFC is irrelevant anyway. So it is really important for folks to understand none of that is going to happen.
Yeah, great point. And for those who are like really zeroing in on this, need-based aid is calculated based on what comes out of the FAFSA and other judgments. But merit-based aid, anybody can get it. You can be the richest guy in the world, and your kid can get some merit-based aid. It can be for anything. Maybe they're great at artists or athletes, or they want a tuba player, whatever it might be. But they can dole out that merit money however they want. So thank you for that clarification. You said there were two things you mentioned. What I had heard is called the sibling loophole, which I thought was really kind of odd, but the sibling discount, sibling loophole, that's behind us. What's the last point that you want to make tonight?
Yeah, the bigger one, I think, for people is that the EFC used to not consider if the family owned a small business or if they owned a farm. Those things were off the table, right? Those two exemptions were rescinded, let's say. Okay. And now when you have to consider all of your assets, if you own a small business, you have to consider that small business and all of the things that go with that as an asset. And so you got to go get a value for that and put it in there. If you own a farm, all of that now are assets. That land, all of that equipment, all of that stuff are assets. And that is having a dramatic effect on the outcome of the FAFSA for small business owners and for farmers. Now, there's probably not a whole lot of farmers, 2 blocks off of Central Park, but there's a lot of them, a lot of small business owners, right? And there's a lot of farmers out where I live in the middle of the cornfields. Sure. So these two changes are having dramatic effects on SAIs and reflection of a family's relative financial situation in ways that are pretty important and I think more impactful for what that number is and what that family might think they're running into.
So it's too early to know what the market response to that is going to be, but how in the world do I value my small business or my family farm? Like, is there a metric or some valuation is this where the government's going to trust me? I mean, how is this likely to work out?
It's anybody's guess right now. There's not a great way or certainly a definitive way that the federal government has said, you're going to use this method to value your small business. You're going to use this method to value your farm. There's been some discussion of what is acceptable and what's not, and some of that has opened up some possibilities. But a whole bunch of congressmen from both sides of the aisle in April filed a legislation to rescind the rescinding of that policy change. They didn't realize the effect it was going to have, and now they're seeing it. And so that might come back in a future year's FAFSA if those Congress people have their way.
Yeah, thank you for all of this. And again, I just can't tell you how much I appreciate having you as a resource. We enjoy working with you, My College Corner and Invite Education. Just tell us a little. I know you're engaged on this really great project called Pathways Planning and Insights. Can you tell us about PPI and like what you're doing there, and also your other, I'm going to say, labor of love, Tuition Fit, and your mission to provide transparency for pricing in college. Can you just tell us a little bit about each of those?
Sure. Pathways, it really is, let's help people at the intersection of financial literacy and college and post-secondary planning. Most of the conversation over the years has been, I got to pick a set of schools, without thinking about price, without thinking about the financial implications of the choices that people make along that path. And then at the end, they get shocked by what ends
Right.
up being a total surprise to them that only the insiders would know.
Sure.
Pathways is focused on helping people see the college search and all of that process through a financially literate lens.
Yeah.
And making sure that we get that information to the people that need it most. The folks that get hammered by this are, frankly, not the stereotypical super low income students. And they're not the traditional, upper middle class suburban folks. It's people that are solidly middle class, people that are second generation Americans, that their understanding of how higher education works is shaped by the country that they came from. And their access to financial instruments is really pretty limited. And so they've really worked in a cash business way for most of their adult lives. And they've raised their kids in the country and they've sent them to public schools. And now it's a chance to really establish their family's place here in the US. And this college search process and the financial part of this process oftentimes just takes them out at the knees, and nobody ever told them. So with Pathways, we do a lot of webinars and a lot of presentations and a lot of presenting people the way to think about this. And we do it in all of the languages that those families need so that the parents can understand these concepts too. There's just too much insider language, right? We were just talking about EFC, expected family contribution, student aid index, SAI, all this stuff. Imagine if you didn't know English at all and you heard those phrases, you might not have a clue what I'm talking about, even if you knew what the word meant, right?
Right.
So we really try to bring this to the folks that are working their tail off to help their next generation have a better life than they did. And they need to know the kind of stuff that just isn't a part of the college planning process these days.
Yeah, and that's so fantastic to meet them where they are, which means in their language, right? Their kids might be going to a school where they're speaking English, but it doesn't mean that English is the first language at home. And as you said, those of us who try to speak English have enough trouble understanding all these arcane terms, let alone someone who's coming and English is their second language. But thank you so much. And then just tell us the 2 minutes, if you could, just on tuition fit. I just love this idea of what you've been trying to, I call it the genetic code that you're trying to crack to help people understand what the actual price of a college is that they can rely on within a range so that they know that if I'm going to apply here, this is likely what my cost is going to be. How are you doing that?
Sure. The Tuition Fit project really is a one-trick pony. Let's figure out how we can build a data set that has all the actual prices that students are going to be asked to pay at all the colleges and universities across the US. And the way to build that data set is not to go ask the colleges. That's not to use their net price calculators, but it's to actually go out and get all the award letters that students have received and put them all into one place and organize that data in a way that the public can search it and protect the personal information. So anonymize all of the information on those letters so everybody's personal information is removed. So we can actually see what's the actual prices for students like me at a school like that or that particular school. And it's people have heard of what Glassdoor did to salaries, and it benefited both sides of the marketplace when that became public. What Edmunds did to the car industry, make all those prices publicly available, it changed the way the car industry works. And we know now that more people bought more cars because of that change. It improved the marketplace. And so that's what the Tuition Fit project is. We're just doing exactly the same thing. And you're right, it's a labor of love and it's a huge lift. But at the time when I started it, it was just the thing that somebody's going to do this. And I think I'm crazy enough to do it.
Well, I'm glad you're crazy enough to do it. And we appreciate your great work. And we'll look forward to circling back with Ask the Financial Aid Expert, Mark Salisbury, another time down the road. Mark, thanks again for joining us at My College Corner today. Really, truly appreciate it.
Thank you, John. Have a great day yourself.
You will. Bye now.